Shalom. Our topic is making halachic rulings when drunk. Um, so this is an interesting topic in terms of obviously practical halacha. So even though most of us aren't poskim, on the other hand, it is kind of illuminating uh, to learn about the topic. You also end up learning about one of the 613 mitzvahs. So we little by little learn about Kol Torah Kula, um, and it's a there's a very interesting machlokas Rambam and Rashi that comes out of this, especially as presented by a Sefer V'Darashta V'Chakarta, which I've seen before by Rav Aaron Grossman, and what comes out of there I think is a very interesting approach to how to learn. So God willing, we'll be able to share that, and maybe even illuminates a halacha on the Seder night. Okay, um, the Torah, after the Nadav and Avihu incident, says very clearly, "Vayidaber Hashem el Aaron lemor." Hashem said to Aaron, "Yain v'shechar al tesht." Wine and intoxicating drink. Don't drink. Ata uvanecha itach, you and your children along with you, bevoachem elo when you come into the tent of meeting. Velo tamutu, and you should not die. Chukat olam ledorotechem. This is an eternal law for all generations. Now, some commentators, I think it's Midrashim, go backwards and say, well, this immediately followed the Nadav and Avihu episode, so it must be that this is exactly what Nadav and Avihu did. Is they drank and then went into the Beis Hamikdash, and so this is where the Torah teaches us this halacha. I was thinking perhaps I didn't check the commentators for it, but right after the death of Nadav and Avihu, so again I think our view of wine and all these kind of things is a little different than in Chazal, but the pasuk says Tenu Shechar. There's a number of psukim against drunkenness. There, I think we're in sync with Chazal, at least in terms of how we approach it. But Chazal, there's a number of psukim against drunkenness, but it does say Tenu Shechar LaOved V'Yain L'Mari Nefesh. Hope I got the pasuk right. Give intoxicating drink to one who suffered a loss, and wine to those who are bitter of soul. Now, just of course, a question. We would not say nowadays, if somebody's down, go have some wine. That would probably not be a healthy recipe. However, in the biblical view of wine, apparently is that that's something that would be able to gladden the heart. However that works. Now, theoretically, it could be, again, this is a suggestion, after the death of Nadav and Avihu, so because Tenu Shechar LaOved V'Yain L'Mari Nefesh, so it could be now there's a worry that Aaron and his remaining sons will drink, as like Chazal made a takana of a number of kosos, a number of cups of wine to drink in the morning, in the house of mourning. So they canceled it because of drunkenness. So it could be that Hashem has to have a special warning, not because this is what Nadav and Avihu did, but rather precautionary, because Aaron and his sons might have an inclination to drink after the loss. So then they're warned not to enter the Beis Hamikdash. Now the Torah here, though, doesn't just tell that particular law, but it rounds out the whole thing, halacha l'maisa, and says not only is it for entering the Beis Hamikdash, but it's ulahavdil bein hakodesh u'bein hachol, to distinguish between things that are holy and things that are not holy. In other words, when somebody will be making clear this is holy, this is not holy, uvein hatameh uvein hator, paskening this is tameh, this is tahor, ulahorot et bnei Yisrael et kol hachukim asher diber Hashem Eloheim b'Moshe, and to instruct the children of Israel about all the laws that Hashem spoke to them through Moshe. So this is the source of a prohibition to paskin to make halachic rulings when drunk. The Rambam brings this, of course, in his Sefer HaMitzvos, but he brings it in the beginning of Hilchos Beis Hamikdash, the halachas of entering the Beis Hamikdash. So this is front and center. Kol Kohen, excuse me, Hakasher La'avodah, any Kohen who is valid to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, Im Shata Yain Asur Lo Likanes Min HaMizbeach V'Lifnim. If he drank wine, it's prohibited for him to enter from the Mizbeach, from the altar and inwards. V'Im Nichnas Ve'Avad, if he went in and he did service, temple service, Avodaso Psula, his service is invalid, and then the Beis Hamikdash staff would have to do it over. V'chayav misa b'dei shamayim, and he is liable for a heavenly death penalty. Shenemar v'lo samusu. You should avoid doing this so that you shouldn't die. Now, the rules are very clear. V'hu sheshasa revis yain chai b'vasachas. It has to be drinking a revis, a quarter of a lug, however you paskin that is. Again, the minimal shear is 86 milliliters. The smallest shear, the 86 milliliters. The larger shear, Chazon Ish, 150 milliliters. Whatever that the equivalent is in ounces. Chai, straight wine, meaning non-diluted wine. V'vasachas, you drank it once, all at once. Miyain shavru elav memyom, and it has to be wine that already had 40 days of fermenting, so that there's alcoholic content. Avalim shasa, pachos miravis yain, if you drank less than that quantity. O shasa ravis vehefsikba, or you drank a ravis and took breaks in the middle. O mazgabamaim, or mix it in with water. O sheshasa yain migito basochmem, or you drank wine right from the wine press and it was within 40 days. You know, obviously grape juice, but even not just grape juice, even on something that hasn't gone through the whole fermentation, that basic level fermentation process. So afilu yaser revis pater, even if it's more than a revis, so the person is absolved from this particular punishment. Ve'enu mechalel avodah, and it doesn't render his service invalid. Shasa yoser miravis min hayayin. He drank more than a revis. Afal pisha yamazug, even if it was diluted with water. Afal pisha ifsik v'sham ma'at, even though he did take breaks. Chayav misa posel avoda. He is chayav misa and renders his avoda invalid. And there's the Rabbi begs to differ. This is one wing, by the way, of the halachas of entering the Beis Hamikdash and paskening when having drunk. All the rules of what did he drink and how much did he drink and in what conditions did he drink, and we're not going to go into that. And another wing of that topic is, what about other things that cause intoxication? Ayashikur mishar mashkin amashakrin. He drank other things that, he drank whiskey or he drank pomegranate wine or whatever it is. Asur likanes lamikdash. It's prohibited to enter. If he entered and he's drunk from other intoxicating drinks, now apparently milk or figs could become fermented, I guess, in a way that would have some alcohol content, and hareze lokeh, he would get makos for transgression. Ve'avodaso kshera, however, his service is still okay. She'ein chayavim misa ela ala yayin b'shas avoda. The only heavenly death penalty is for wine and service in the Beis Hamikdash. And rendering the service invalid is only if somebody has drunk from wine. Okay, so that's the background in terms of this halacha of entering the Beis Hamikdash and what are the rules of the wine. But here's now what we're going to be focusing on. Uchashem she'asur lekohen likanes lemikdash mipnei hashikrus. Just like it's prohibited for a kohen to enter the Beis Hamikdash because of drunkenness, kach asur lechol adam. The same thing. It's also permitted for anybody, bein kohen, bein Yisrael, whether it's a kohen or Yisrael. Meaning, this is not a something that focuses on these particular people, but it applies to everybody. Again, even though the psukim, you might have said this is addressed only to Aaron and his sons, and it is true that that the Kohanim in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, maybe in the first temple period, so they were associated with Psak Halacha. True. However, this halacha, this particular rule, applies to everybody. It's prohibited lehoros to make halachic instruction kishu shasui when he has drunk. And even he ate these dates or drank this milk, and his mind got messed up a little bit, meaning he got intoxicated in some other way, and the Rambam is bringing what I assume is the borderline level, because other things that are wines, like pomegranate wine or whatever, or honey wine, and certainly things that are intense, distilled whiskey, etc. So those things are obviously going to be prohibited. But even somebody who went only as far as eating these, dates with alcohol content, partially fermented, shenemar l'horosis b'nei Yisrael, or somehow intense dates, certain dates get your mind a little bit messed up. So he should not make halachic instruction. Shenemar l'horosis b'nei Yisrael, to instruct the people of Israel, the children of Israel. V'im hora b'davar shu mafurish b'Torah ad sheyedu atzdukim. What if he talked about something like, pork is prohibited, or something that she'asheretz tamei v'atzvardei tahor, that rodents are impure and a frog is pure, is tahor. So that's something that's mefurish in the pasuk, that's explicit in the verses of the Chumash, and that would not be considered prohibited halachic instructions. Ve'adam asur, and the fact that blood is prohibited. Ve'chayotzi baz, anything that is like that. Now, now comes the Rambam that we're going to focus a little bit more on. Umuter l'shikor lilamed Torah or lilmod Torah. It's prohibited for a drunk to, and again, you have to figure out based on the halachas what this includes. Meaning somebody who is, and again, I'm not going to focus on it, but somebody is so drunk that he's, tomorrow people are going to tell him what he did, and he has had a blackout and he doesn't really know what he's doing at all. So he's like a crazy person. That's already, shikrus shalot. That's a very, very high level. But somebody who has drunk and it affected his mind, so he can learn. V'afilu halachos u'midrashos, and even halachas and midrash. V'hu shelo yoreh. That's provided that he doesn't make halachic instruction. V'mayach chacham kavua lahora'ah. If he was a chacham, a wise man, who was literally fixed or set to give halachic instruction, lo yilamed shelimudo hora, or lo yilmod shelimudo hora'ah. He shouldn't learn or /teach because his learning or his teaching is halachic instruction. Now, there are two variant texts in the Rambam here. In our editions, we have this Lamed Lamed Mem Dalet and Yud Lamed Mem Dalet. which could be read as to teach, lelamed. And then this would be saying that it's mutter for a shikr to teach Torah, even halachos and midrashos, as long as he doesn't make halachic instruction. On the other hand, if he was a chacham kavua, lahora, he should not teach Torah, for his teaching is halachic instruction. However, there are those who actually add a vav right here, and they would say, mutter l'shikor lilmod Torah. It's mutter for him to learn Torah, even halachos and midrashos, as long as he doesn't make halachic instruction, which would be making halachic rulings for others. However, if he was a chacham kavua lahara, he shouldn't learn, for his learning itself is hora. That's interesting. We'll focus on this later on. Now, where does the Rambam get all this from the Gemara? Rabbi Yonam Shmuel Shasar Gemara and Erevin Shasar Ravis Yain Al Yoreh. Somebody who drank a ravis of wine, he should not make halachic instructions. Now, there's a very offbeat Gemara. Rav Nachman said, again, this is Rav Nachman after previously learning another sugya and saying what a nice sugya it is. On this one, I'm Rav Nachman, Lo Mali Al Shmai, so this is not a nice sugya. My mind isn't clear unless I drink a ravis of wine. And that's interesting. There's another Amora, my mind escapes me, who said, Chamra v'reche pakrin, that both smells, fragrant smells, and wine and fragrant smells made me wise, made me especially sharp. So Rav Nachman seems to say exactly the opposite. Again, he would agree that drunkenness itself, if somebody's drunk, so he shouldn't paskin. But he said, my mind isn't clear without drinking the ravis of wine. Now, Rava said, my time, why did the master say that? Well, again, Rava was his Talmud. What does the pasuk mean when it says the one who, now, literally shepherds prostitutes, which is somebody who is trying to make money through this illicit profession, Yabein Hon, he's going to lose a lot of money. What do Chazal darshan this pasuk as? Obviously, you're not supposed to, the pshat is very clear. You shouldn't do that, definitely. And the pasuk is, definitely kipshuto. But what is the metaphorical meaning of the pasuk? Kol omer shmua zo lo noah vezo eno noah. The one who says this teaching is nice and the other one is not nice. Me'abed honashel Torah. He loses the wealth of Torah. Again, it's a play on the words of the word zonot, zonah. So Amr Lay said Rav Nachman, Had Rabbi, okay, I retract. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. So that's an interesting. Now, in that same Gemara, the Gemara tells that Rabban Gamliel was traveling, and there were all sorts of things that came up in his travels, all sorts of halachic things that were learned from the episode. And when he reached a place called Kazi, which is in the north of Israel, so somebody came to do Ataras Nadarim. He wanted to retract a certain vow that he had taken. Amar Lazeh Shemos, Rabban Gamliel said to the person who was with him, Klum Shatina Ravit Yain Italki, did we drink a ravis of wine, of that Italian wine? Amar Lohed, he said, yes. So he told this fellow, so they said, listen, this fellow should walk along with us until the wine dissipates. In other words, Gemara's understanding is that if you can walk it off. If you walk it off, the effects of the wine will dissipate, and then I'll paskin. They walk for 3 meal, until they reach this place which is called Sulama Shel Tzur. Rabban Gamliel got off the donkey, he wrapped himself up, and he did Hataras Nadarim. So that's an example. So the Gemara says, We learned a lot of things at that time. That a quarter of a lug, a revis of Italian wine, will create the effects of drunkenness. Lamadnu, we also learned shikor al yoreh. We also learned that somebody who is drunk should not make halachic instructions. V'lamadnu shederech mefigas hayayin. We also learned that walking will take away the effects of the wine. We also learned that you should not annul vows if you're riding on a donkey or you're walking or you're standing. Rather, you should be sitting. Okay. A second Gemara, Krisus Yud Gimel. This is where we darshan exactly what it is that you should not do if you have drunk wine. Tana Rabbanan. It goes to the psukim word by word. To distinguish between that which is kodesh and that which is non-kodesh. Elu damin ve'erchin charamim ve'akdeshus. This is all these realms of things that have to do with items that are sanctified. Money which is sanctified, and somebody donates his value, and charamim, things that are set aside for the konim, for the Beis Hamikdash, hekdesh. Beina Tomei Beina Tahor, Elu Tumas V'taros. That's things having to do with Tuma V'tara. So to paskin that this is Tomei, this is Tahor. Ula Horos, Zohara, that's halachic instructions. Halachic instruction. Es kol hachukim elu midrashos, asher diber Hashem zu halacha. So it is prohibited, according to this, to do midrash or halacha. Biyad Moshe is a Talmud. And that's Talmud, which seems to be contrasted with Mishnah here. Yachol afa Mishnah, maybe even Mishnah is prohibited. Talmud Lamar Ulahoros. Ulahoros teaches that Mishnah is okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yachol af Talmud could even be Talmud. Talmud could also be prohibited. Talmud Lamar Ulahoros. Talmud is mutter, only halachic instruction is prohibited. And the Rambam seems to paskin like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. But if we backtrack for a moment to the original approach, so what's prohibited? So the first approach seems to be saying everything except for Mishnah is prohibited. Certainly halachic instruction, and halachic instruction in the realm of Tumah V'tara, and in the realm of kedusha, things that are sanctified things, hora, halachic instructions. But even learning, again, I ask once again, learning and teaching, midrash and halacha, and even prohibited is Talmud. Maybe Mishnah is prohibited. Now, what's the difference between Mishnah and Talmud? So Mishnah, we understand, is scenarios and rulings. Talmud is understanding them based on their halachic reasoning. So it would follow that Mishnah, just knowing Mishnah itself, is not prohibited because that's not hora'ah, that's not halachic instructions. Because if you don't understand the halachic reasonings, so you're not going to understand how to paskin. That's why we have not only Mishnah, but we have Gemara, we have Talmud, because we want to understand the halachic reasonings. If you look in the Mishnayos, so it's true that some Mishnayos give you the halachic reasoning, but most don't. So these are not just two books, the Mishnah and the Gemara, but these are two genres of learning. Learning the halachas, and most of Mishnayos is like that. Not all of Mishnayos, but most of Mishnayos is like that. Most of the book Mishnah is like that, but the genre of learning called Mishnah, the type of learning called Mishnah, is learning the scenarios and the rulings, and Talmud is understanding them according to halachic reasoning, proper halachic reasoning. So Mishnah, according to the first approach, is permitted, but everything else, it sounds like everything else is prohibited. So the first approach seems to be saying alcohol has no place in that which leads to psak halacha. Mishnah is the skeleton of the oral Torah, without understanding Talmud, without understanding halacha, without the halachic rulings, without understanding midrash, how halachas are derived from the psukim, you're not going to be able to make halachic rulings. So that's the first approach. But Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says different, and the Rambam seems to go like Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Yachal af Talmud, maybe even Talmud is included. Talmud Amar lahoros. So he seems to be saying something much different. That halachic instruction is contrasted here with Talmud. Talmud is the process of learning, and lahoros seems to be some form of the final results of halachic instruction. Now, there's two additional points in this Gemara. One is what we already saw in the Rambam, totally obvious halachas. How do you know that it's mutter for if somebody asks a posek, somebody, is this a frog tameh? And he could say, no, frog's tower. The whole Tumah Torah doesn't apply to frogs. It applies to these particular rodents. So would somebody who drank wine be able to paskin on that? Name of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, V'lo Rabbanan. That sounds like Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda and not the Rabbanan because the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda was more lenient about, and he said halachas are permitted. He said Talmud is permitted. Excuse me. Says the Gemara, Afilu Tamer Rabbanan. No, even the Rabbanan who were more restrictive on what one is able to do. The only heter was for Mishnah. Still, Shani Hachad Azil Krei Be'Ravhu. That's something that you could just, a kid who learns Chumash was able to know that halacha. So that's the first thing. That blatantly obvious halachas are not included in this prohibition, and the Rambam brought that. Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav said the halacha is like Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, and that's what we mentioned already. The Rambam seems to be following that approach. Rav lo moki mamoram yom tov lechavrei mishum shichrus. On Yom Tov, when you drink, so Rav didn't give his public shir. Shani Rav de ore mori. Rav is certainly paskins. He's a posek. No, v'nekim delora. So let's make sure that he'll have his amora that would explain what he was saying, and he won't do any halachic psak. Kol hechad yasiv Rav lo sagi le below hara. Wherever Rav is sitting, it's impossible without halachic instruction. Now, that itself was that last halacha that we read in the Rambam. Remember, the Rambam said, Mutter l'shikor lilmod Torah. Once again, it's either lilamed or lilmod. V'afilu halachos midrashos. V'hu shalor, as long as it doesn't make halachic instructions. V'imaya chacham kavua lahora, like Rav. Lo, either yilmad or yilmod. Should be yilmod, not lilmod. Shalimudo hara. That his learning / teaching is hora, is halachic instruction. So that's the way the Rambam learned Rav. But Rashi learns it different. Rashi says, why didn't Rav make his drasha? Since Gemara is permitted, and certainly midrashos are permitted. Answer, lo sagi below hora, dekuli amu boimine. Everybody's going to ask Rav Shailas. Now that's different than the Rambam. The Rambam seemed to say that somebody who's that status of a posek, just his learning or his shiur itself is going to be by nature halachic instruction. Now that's interesting. Rashi seems to be saying when Rav's giving a shiur, somebody's going to ask him a shaila. Ain't because of the var that Rav's going to give a shiur. It's like Rav Avad Yosef giving a shiur. Rav Avad gives a shiur, so if somebody's going to ask a halachic shaila, even if he gives a Gemara shiur, halachic shaila is going to come up left and right. So it now Rashi and Rambam seem to be arguing. According to the to the Rambam, a great posek can't teach even Gemara when he has drunk. And again, I'm deliberately evading the issue of how much he is drunk and what state he's in, etc. But for argument's sake, he had a revis of wine, feels a little tipsy from the wine. So, and I once had this, by the way. I saw Rav Nebenzahl on a Shabbos morning when I was, and I asked him a shaila, and he said, I can't answer. I had Kiddush wine. So that was the first time I encountered this halacha. So the Rambam though says even further, somebody who's a master posek, again, two girsas, his shear, no matter what it's in, is itself psak halacha, or even further, his learning is psak halacha. Now, if you look in the Rambam's tshuva, the Rambam has a tshuva about this. This is actually what got me interested in this topic. And the questioner asks, when we talk about somebody who drank something not paskening, do we mean somebody asked him a practical halachic question that was now relevant? Or is it even a halachic question that's not relevant? Like somebody asks, somebody's giving a shirt, somebody's curious about a halacha, but it's not something that he's now dealing with. So you can understand the questioner seems to be saying, what do we mean by hara? Hara is an actual shaila comes up to the Rav that's relevant now, or somebody asks a halachic shaila of the Rav, not necessarily relevant now. So he says, Ein afresh ben hora she'asa din shemorabo ze ashikur ma'aseh ata o hora shelo yaseh ba'alach l'maaseh achshav. So there's no difference between the two. Ein roy l'shikur b'shum panim l'ashiv al she'ela toriyit. He shouldn't answer any Torah questions. Ela im tiyam avueres b'psuki Torah. And like he says, unless it is very clear cut. The Chumash, like we said about the frog versus the rodent. Now it says lilamed, and you'll remember that we had, and I neglected, my apologies, I neglected to put the footnote here. Afilu shieba ze alimud he'ara al heyos tvar ploni muter. He's able to learn or even teach, even if it will impact on halacha. Zulasi miyeh so adoresh, but that doesn't count if the person who is giving the shir is mifursam kavua lahora'ah. If somebody is a famous posek, she'az asur lo lilmod b'shum panim. From the moment that he drank a reviz, it's prohibited for him, and here it says limod, to learn. Like we said, when Rav Rav's learning is always psak halacha. And then the Rambam says, Visham b'shlishi b'krisos nispar. It's clear from there, shekol hora b'chol minei mitzvahs asur zulasi ma shebeyarno. It's all prohibited. Now, this is very important because there's a Tosos in Sanhedrin Membeis that says something that astounded me when I first saw it, and I needed to read a lot till I was calmed down. Tosos, based on a Gemara there, says Dine Mamanos you would be able to judge if you had drunk, but Psak Halach on the one hand, or capital cases, no. That was wild. So I saw some explanations. Orcha Shulchan ends up paskening that we shouldn't do it, but it's a big machlokas achronim about it. That I don't remember the names. The Tumim on the one hand, I forget versus who's on the other hand, but based on this particular Tosos, And one approach was that because money is something that you could theoretically retract, other things you wouldn't be able to take back, or because there's two other judges, and then it would follow that if all three judges had drunk, that they wouldn't be able to paskin. Now, what comes out of this, though, is that Rashi and the Rambam seem to be defining lehoros in the Chumash in a different way. Rashi seems to say that what's prohibited for somebody who has drunk to do is to respond to a halachic shaila. Even Rav, his teaching itself was not prohibited. What they were worried about was somebody's going to ask him a shaila, and it's going to come up in the shir, through the shir. The Rambam seems to be saying that hora for a normal person is when he's asked a shaila. But hora for a posek, his mere learning or teaching, again, I'm going back and forth each time because of the two different girsas in the Rambam, but his learning itself is halachic instruction. So Rambam seems to be defining Hora'ah as rendering practical halachic rulings, not as responding to a shaila, which the word sounds like that, lohoros, but rather true halacha l'maisa learning. So what comes out is something very interesting that is by the way, I wanted to the way the Sefer Chinuch says, "Kol mishu chacham gadol b'nei adam somchim al haraso." Anybody who's a great chacham that people rely on his psak halachas, asur lo lishanos l'talmidav v'hu shasoy. He can't teach. That's clear here. Shalimud shelo kamo orahi kamo shamarnu. By the way, an interesting thing for the discussions about women learning. So this is mamish an aside. Sefer Chinuch and Mitzvah Kuf Nun Beis says the prohibition of Bias Mikdash applies to men and women. A woman also would be prohibited to drink and then go into the Beis HaMikdash. Umanias ha'ora b'chol makom v'chol zman, and all places, not just in the Beis HaMikdash, all times, not just when the Beis HaMikdash is standing, is prohibited for men. V'chein be'isha chachama ru'uya lehoros, and the same would apply to a woman who's a wise woman who would be able to, if she would make halachic rulings, she would, when after having drunk, so she would transgress this avera also. So you can throw that into the discussion. I just want to end with a very engaging discussion that appears in a Sefer V'Darashta V'Chakarta. He brings the Machlokas Rashi and the Rambam, and he understands that when the Rambam is talking about learning by a posek. A posek's learning itself is hora because his learning is extracting halacha maisa from the source. Rashi again says that hora is responding to a halachic query. Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah have a machlokas on what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos means when it talks about somebody who is a chacham not being like a golem, nivha lahashiv. Nivha lahashiv. So Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah argue. Rabbeinu Yonah says what I always thought, which was nivha lahashiv. He doesn't answer too quickly. Somebody who hastily answers is problematic. That's, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, a golem. Rambam says somebody who is afraid to answer, nivhal lahashiv, that's the golem. Wow. So this is so the Chasam Sofer asks as a question. Rambam and Rabbeinu Yonah argue about this particular point. So it turns out that a person's stuck because they seem to be mutually contradictory approaches. So I'm a golem. I can't avoid being a golem. I will either be Rabbeinu Yonah's golem or I'll be the Rambam's golem. So the Chasam Sofer explains as follows. There's two stages. One is the learning that a person does at night. That's when he's learning by himself and he's trying to, the posek is learning by himself, and every single thing he's thinking about so deeply in a way where he's configuring what are the practical halachic implications of what I'm learning. So then he's not nivhal, he's doing it, he's extracting the halachas little by little, with patience, deliberately, diligently. If he learns that way at night, in the morning when he's asked shilas, he'll be able to answer right away because he's already answered the shaila as he was learning. That's the way they say Rav Shlomo Zalman was learning. Whenever he was learning, he was always figuring out, even as a young person, he was figuring out what are the practical halacha implications of this Gemara. What comes out of this, again, he has a whole drasha on this, on the Chasam Sofer, on the psukim, on certain psukim in Tehillim. But then the Sefer V'darashta V'chakarta says a very interesting thing. According to the Rambam, you have a really powerful question. The Seder night. We drink 4 cups. What are you supposed to do at the end of the Seder? So what do they say? That a person is supposed to be involved in Hilchos HaPesach all night. How can you be involved in Hilchos HaPesach if you're a posek? You drank wine. And so that's a real difficulty. And so it doesn't say that, well, we find different rules of the Seder night for different people. We don't find that. So what he suggests is, he says, have a look at the Rambam, and I checked him on this. You look at the Rambam does not bring that halacha of learning Hilchos Pesach all night. The Rambam says you should tell the story. Telling the story is the mitzvah of the night. Telling the story is not learning. Is not Talmud Torah. The Rambam would say that the posek on that night should not do his standard learning, and the Shulchan Aruch, who doesn't necessarily bring he says very likely that the Shulchan Aruch, who does bring this thing about learning all night, might hold like Rashi, that Horah doesn't mean learning for a posek, but simply Horah is always defined as somebody rendering and making an answer to a halachic query that somebody else asked him, and Rav, that's always going to come up, but not that the very learning or teaching of Rav is itself Horah. So, in short, it turns out that the way they speak on the Seder night is consistent with their approaches. The Rambam's approach is consistent with what he says on the Seder night. Anyways, that's the biblical prohibition against rendering halachic decisions when after having drunk. The source in the Gemara, the Rambam's Piskei Halacha concerning it, the drashas from the psukim, and then the special case of an expert posek, a master posek, who there's a machlokas between Rashi and the Rambam. The Rashi says he can't give a shir because people are gonna ask shilas. It's just gonna happen. Whereas the Rambam says he can't either learn or teach because his learning or teaching itself is going to be psak halacha. So after a master posek drinks wine, that's the time for him to be involved in Agadita or in learning Tanakh or midrashim or the like, but not being involved in Talmud. Anyways, that's what I wanted to share with you. The Machlokas Rashi and the Rambam on this halacha, and the Tshuvas Rambam that's connected.